Good morning and welcome to Behind the Gavel with Jason. I am your host and Behind the Gavel, Jason Roski, and I'm excited to bring to you today Liz Lidgett from Liz Lidgett Gallery and Designs in Des Moines, Iowa. Liz, how you doing?
Good, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely, yeah. So as Liz said, this is our second time on our show.
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about art in the public space, the meanings behind it. But real quick, for those who don't know who Liz Lidgett is, she went to University of Missouri and then went to USC and studied, and this is important for our conversation. He has a master's in curatorial practice in the public sphere from USC. I didn't realize that was the Roski College too, but it's a different spelling, so I'm assuming it's not related.
Close.
Although we're German and Polak, so we spell things all kinds of different ways, so I need to look into that. But Liz has been heavily involved in placing art in the public sphere in and around Des Moines and other places. She has been quoted and interviewed by Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and others about this very topic. In fact, she was quoted recently as saying, "It can't just be a coincidence when talking about President Biden's choice of artwork around the inauguration and signings and what's in his office." And so we're going to talk about that. We want to talk about the Princess Diana sculpture that's just revealed and other things. So Liz, welcome back. And why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about you and what gets you so excited about public art?
Sure. So I am a gallery owner in Des Moines. I'm in the gallery now, but while I do have an interest, of course, and a love for selling artwork that people can place in their home so they can live with original artwork on a daily basis, I also realize that people don't always go to museums. They don't always go to galleries. And so over the last 5 or 6 years, I have been on this crusade, or whatever you'd want to call it, to get more interesting public art, specifically here in central Iowa. But we help a lot of different places. We have a few missions. We want to make sure that there's a large representation in the type of artists that are helping to create the public work, and then also who is represented in the work. There are so many different things that we don't want to keep creating the same 5 murals over and over again. So I think of it as, and that's possible to do. But I feel like even though I don't have a governing body that's overseeing what we're doing, I feel a huge sense of duty to be able to create interesting work for this community.
Very cool, very cool. And it's interesting you talk about not having the same pieces recreated over and over again. A lot of public art looks very similar.
It does. Yeah, it does. And I have said this so many times, but as somebody that sits on a lot of committees for public artwork, helping to create new public artwork, good art dies by committee. And that's something that I have to repeat all of the time to people, because you can't please everybody, and you can't even please everybody on the committee. So how can we create good public artwork that is going to represent a lot of different people, be interesting, be adding something to the conversation about public art in that community, and do it with a lot of different opinions and cooks in the kitchen? It's not always easy.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, Susie. I love that quote too. Good art dies by committee. I just wrote that down.
Yeah.
I can remember that. You've mentioned that before.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, I think you used that quote when you talked about Ian Rank Broadley's sculpture that was just unveiled of Princess Diana. And folks, if you're watching, if you have comments or questions, please post them below. We'd love to talk to you during our show today. If you have questions, let us know as well. So the Princess Diana sculpture has received praise. It's received, I wouldn't say hate, but there's definitely been a portion of people who think it's just terrible. And all points in between. But first, before we talk about what we think of the piece or what you think of the piece, tell us what you noticed about the piece. Public art can and usually does and should have meanings. What are the meanings behind some of the factors in that sculpture?
Well, that's interesting that you say that. So one of the things when I'm talking about a piece of artwork, like this seems so basic, but one of the first things is, what are we actually looking at here? So the sculpture is 1 1/4 times size of what her normal height was. And then she's got 3 children around her. She has two children kind of flanking her on either side, and then a child behind her that you can only see from varying views. Interestingly, there's so many royal style blogs, and so this is all on them that they did this great research. But the outfit that Princess Diana, I mean, she's a style icon, right? She's one of the most beautiful, well-known faces in the world. And so you have to get it perfectly right if you are going to actually represent her. So kind of some of the interesting things that they did with her is that they put her in an outfit from a Christmas card from a few years before she passed. Maybe that was an outfit that was important to the boys. Maybe that was an important card to them. We don't know why that was chosen, but a haircut that did not align with that. So women change their hairstyles all of the time, right? But this was a haircut that was like 2-3 years down the line from right before she passed. So there's interesting times where like her style and her hair doesn't match up. That's an interesting choice to me. Everything is a choice. So everything that is in a piece of artwork, everything that is not in a piece of artwork is a choice. And so you have to kind of ask yourself, like, why did the committee or why did the artists make these choices? Interestingly, there is diversity in the children that are around her. They are meant to be kind of represent her legacy and the charitable work that she did. There is a young Black boy that is to her left who is wearing shoes. There are two Caucasian or indiscriminate race children that are right to her side and behind her who are not wearing shoes. She is wearing shoes. So, I mean, again, that's a choice. Why was that choice made? Even just kind of like down to the things of who are these people and why are they wearing these things? People are going to ask those questions. She's not smiling, for example. I think that Princess Diana she was so known for her warmth. Now she's in a very confident pose. I think that's a great thing for her. You don't always see that in statues of women as well. So to have that confident pose as she's like almost taking a step forward and legs separated, standing tall and proud, that's a wonderful thing for her, but she's not smiling. So one of the interesting things to me is that when we think of Princess Diana, I think of her crouching and talking one-on-one, eye to eye with a child. If she were to be represented, that would mean something about not only you could represent Princess Diana, the person, but also her ethos.
Right.
What does this actually say about her as a person? There is a quote from a poem down below her. And then on either sides of the base, it talks about how the mural was revealed or unveiled by her sons and who they are. But, there were just again, everything's a choice. And I think that they made some really unfortunate choices because you don't get any better sense of who she was and what her legacy truly was.
Yeah, and I think it's so many points you hit are so square on. It is an odd juxtaposition of this really strong, powerful woman. And like you said, the combination of the outfit and her hair is
odd.
out of touch. But she's like, if a man was represented that way standing over children, there wouldn't be any warmth to that at all.
No.
And the fact that it's Diana brings warmth to it because we know what she was about.
Right.
But her pose doesn't match the feeling of the sculpture, at least not to me.
Right.
It looks like a very strong corporate leader stance on her part.
Yeah, it does.
Which is a great way to remember her, but not in relationship to her work with children.
Exactly. And so what is the message that we're trying to send here?
Right.
It felt like there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen and a lot of people had a lot of ideas. And then all of those, there was no specific point of view.
Right.
And so then, a little bit of this was taken and a little bit of that and somebody's opinion over here. And that's when something gets watered down and there's not a strong point of view.
Yeah, it's a shame. And Ian Rank broadly has done so much good work.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's done other work for the Royals. I mean, this is clearly somebody that they trust. He won the commission for doing, I believe it was maybe her 50th anniversary for a coin. And then also had done something of Prince Philip before he passed. So, I mean, this was an artist that the royal family certainly felt comfortable with. But it just, why? It felt like he was more of a technician than an artist.
Right, absolutely. And even the features of her face, somebody posted.
Not exactly right.
It's they posted a picture that it's so great. They made a sculpture to commemorate Princess Diana with an image of Robert Redford, and they put it side by side. I was like, oh my god,
really?
It really does look a lot. I mean,
that's the problem. When you are trying to recreate somebody that is so beloved and her face is so well known, maybe 100 years from now, hard to say how people are going to know how she was and what her charitable work was. But when I picture her crouching down, speaking to a child, and I picture her with that vest on, walking through the landmines. And those are like the two images in my mind of her charitable work. Working with AIDS patients, all of those things. And then this says that how?
Right. Yeah. It would be, I think it would be really interesting to see what the artist Ian, if he didn't have any restraints or inputs, what he would come up with.
Yeah.
That would have been a much more interesting sculpture, I think.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the pitfalls of this particular sculpture.
Yeah.
And I know we have people watching this like Dave and Catherine and Sarah, and we'll have others who watch who are in the public space or thinking about what kind of this just came to my head, so I hate to drop this on you. What kind of steps could or should towns, counties, states, municipalities take to ensure that the art that they choose or commission doesn't get watered down? How do you keep that singular vision and focus?
That's tough. And that's a tough question. You know, the interesting thing that, again, I said 5 or 6 years ago, when I decided that I really wanted to start helping to create murals, one of the first things I did was I met with members of the city council. I met with someone from our public art foundation here. I mean, I really wanted to make sure that I was doing my due diligence. Making sure that there weren't city codes that I was going to be crossing and all of those things. And it really came down to here in Des Moines, if you were a private building owner and you weren't putting up advertising or something that was lewd or something along those lines, but if it was really art and qualified as art, you could make that decision. So I didn't have to go with the city or the municipality and all of the kind of the layers. I have since had to work with them on different projects, like with a university and things like that. And I'm glad that I don't have to on the regular. But you have trusted people that are going to give you diverse feedback, but they are not going to say like, it's my way or the highway. I mean, that's one of the important things when we're putting together a committee. I really do want the community's input because their buy-in is important. It's very important. But there is a point where you could continue to get opinions on a piece of artwork for the rest of your life. At some point, you just have to make a decision, right? But I said this a little earlier, but I do feel a sense of duty. So you have to find somebody that believes in this, but also feels that sense of duty, because you could railroad everybody and continue to make the same piece of artwork or represent the same type of people. One of the things that we are talking about internally, and again, no one is making us do this, but it's just important to us, is that, you know, who is artist? Are we making sure that there is a wide variety of backgrounds of artists that we are working with on a regular basis? And then if there are people or communities represented somehow in the piece of artwork, not every piece of artwork can represent every person, but overall, over the expansion of all of our work, can we somehow bring it balanced? And over the last few years, especially as we have turned in even more intense eye on making sure that we're doing this and being good stewards of our walls here in this community. We're making sure that, we have done a mural of a transgender woman. We've done a mural of several different types of faiths represented, different sexualities, race, ethnicity, all of that. We've tried to do a wide variety of types of people. And that's really, really important. Now, not every mural has a type of person, but that's when you look back and you say, okay, even if it's an abstract piece, are we doing a wide variety and diversity of background in artists?
Right. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
And you and I are going to have a conversation later on about that the lack of diversity historically in the world of art, whether it's artists of color, women artists, it's when you really look at the numbers and the data, it's scary how even today there's huge disparities in the representation and marketing and support of and for artists who aren't white men. It's a conversation we'll have some other time.
Yeah.
This been a great, and I love what we just talked about as far as Diana sculpture and public works in general. Let's talk about now President Biden's choice and use of art. There was a lot made about this during the inauguration and shortly thereafter. Art has very particular meanings and represents certain things. Talk a little bit about, there's paintings that were sculpture. Let's talk about how the president has used, and compare it to previous presidents, if you want to, the statements they've made with the choices in their art.
Well, specifically with President Biden, something that has been so fascinating to me to see during his presidency is it seems like his team is being very thoughtful about sending messages through artwork. So Dr. Biden chose a piece of artwork that was on display in the rotunda for the inauguration. It was also, I believe, in the kind of inauguration pamphlet in case you were not able to physically go and see it. And something that's interesting to me there is that it even went beyond what was most likely the artist's intention. They brought in a piece by an African-American artist from the Smithsonian. Just a quick tip or note is that the president can borrow any piece of artwork from the Smithsonian. So that is what he did both for the inauguration and for outfitting his office, which is kind of like a great thing to be able to do.
It's a nice closet to be able to pull from, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So anyway, they picked a piece by an African-American artist that had been done sometime in the late 19th century. I could have told you when I was a little bit closer to the inauguration, but
actually it was 1850 something. It was just before the Civil War.
Okay, great. And so one of the interesting things is that there was a rainbow in the piece.
Right.
So that certainly can mean new beginnings, and does come right after a storm. All of those things, they were sending that message like this is a new presidency here. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, at the time in 1850, that artist was most likely not thinking about how the rainbow now represents the LGBTQ community. And so, but the Bidens were. Right. And so they were saying that you are welcome in this White House and in this administration. So it's interesting to me to be able to both, who is the artist? That's important. What was the message that the artist intended? That's important. But then over time, almost 200 years later, what does the symbolism mean now? Mm-hmm. So that's really fascinating to me that they thought about that. Now, in his office is a whole other thing too, which I think has been so fascinating, where he has done some really great different things where he has done messages in front of a portrait of the artist, where, like, for example, he'll be in front of a portrait where that president had dealt with a pandemic. So things like that are just really interesting, but he's not saying that necessarily. It's just really important to them that Other people may be doing the research, and they're very subtly saying their message. So that's very interesting to me. Also, they chose people, busts and things like that from a variety of different backgrounds. He feels like all of these people that he has in his office are giving them their insights and past experiences and knowledge and helping him with his presidency. There is a portrait of Benjamin Franklin in there, talking about his administration's reliance on science. There's just so many different things that he did that was just so fascinating in that office. So lots and lots to talk about, but they're doing subtle messages, which is really great.
And I haven't seen this. I'm wondering if you have. Is it a team? Is it a person? Or do we have any idea who's making those choices?
So it's interesting because we got to do an interview with USA Today because I was doing a lot of Instagram stories about, okay, what are the meanings behind all of this and all of that. And so USA Today did an article about it, and they reached out to the White House. They didn't respond.
Why? That's such an interesting topic.
I felt like I was going to be validated because I was doing all of these like art conspiracy theories that he was, really purposely putting a piece of artwork behind him in all of these Instagram posts. And then I was diving into the art history of it and all of that. All of that's still on my Instagram stories, but it's, who knows? I think he has a very savvy communications team.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to find out who that person is or who's spearheading that. I want to thank Nabila, Kurt, Joan, Carol, Dave, and others for watching. If you have questions, post them below or tell us where you're watching from. I think it'd be fascinating. So let's kind of bring that to the home, right? So you own an art gallery. We sell a lot of art.
Yeah.
You have a very interesting painting behind you.
Yeah.
I have a painting of the Flint Hills behind me.
Yep.
How can people make statements in their home with the art they choose, or should they not even think about it, or is it a completely separate topic?
Oh gosh, no, I think that they certainly should think about it. Now, sometimes you just respond to a piece of artwork and it's beautiful. It's the colors you love the movement in it, you love the texture. You just have a visceral reaction to it. That's great. Like that's okay. You don't have to have any meaning beyond that other than you just react to it and you love it. However, you can also be really thoughtful about how your collection represents you as a person, your family. For example, I had been told about a collection where there was a couple that everything in their artwork had to have 2 in it. Not the number 2, but it just like maybe it was 2 canvases or 2 lines in it, or the number 2 could be represented a million different ways. But then they had a child, and then all of a sudden everything had to have 3.
Right.
And so there was, just really interesting ways that they thought about it. Now, is there a favorite vacation place that you would love to have represented? Do you love to bike? Your hobbies, your places, the things you love, all of that, that's great to have that represented in your artwork because that makes you happy, right? Like those are the things that you enjoy doing and spending in your time. So why wouldn't you want that on your walls as well?
Right.
So you can, you certainly can. And a commission is also a great way to do that. We do a lot of commissions here. And so I think the main thing about a commission is that you need to, if you choose an artist, then let them do their work. You've chosen them for a reason. But is there something small? Is there something subtle that you can do? We had a friend we had a commission done for her. It was a still life. She loved this artist's still life, but their last name starts with B. And so they put bumblebees all over their home. And so he really subtly put a bee flying into the still life. Something so small, but they know it. It's touching to them. Right. I think there's just really interesting ways that you can make a piece be important to you for a long time.
Very interesting. And let's talk about corporate art, because, obviously doing murals, and I'm assuming you work with, corporate, office type work. We just sold a huge corporate art collection. If you're a CEO or an accountant or a lawyer or a restaurant owner or whatever, how do you, what do you think, what kind of things can they look for in art, whether it's commissioned or just purchasing something they like?
Sure.
Should that artwork say something about their business, or should it just be they like the art, or could it be both?
Well, I think it should. Your artwork and your art collection is a way to say something and send a message before anybody says anything to that client or customer when they're walking into your building. For a long time, my very first client, and I worked with them for a long time, just up until the pandemic, was an ag company. And so we made sure that they had a great collection of Midwest regionalist landscapes. But if there was a crop in that piece, then is that crop properly represented? Are they using technology that company potentially helped with? Is it a crop that they sell a chemical for? I mean, it was those things that like really subtly, like we do corn but not soybeans, so we're not going to show soybeans in these, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
We also just helped a great new law firm here locally. They were two women that had left their larger law company, and they were the new partners. And so we decided that for everything on their walls was going to be by a female artist, and they were going to have a female artist-based collection, just because it was really important to them that they were starting a female-led firm. So something even as subtle as like, who is the artist, that is really important too.
Right, and it's interesting you talk about ag. One of our good a customer of mine has become a good customer and a good friend. His family historically was in the corn business.
Oh yeah.
And not like they didn't have a farm; they were a corn company.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so he started buying. He would buy artwork from us, and we had those initial relationships with somebody. There's always that. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. And then you notice, like, well, he's bought 3 paintings that have corn in them.
Yeah.
So I asked him about it, and he told me that, and he has a collection of artwork that features corn somehow or another.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously was important to his family and to his way of life growing up. And so it was just really interesting thing about how such a random thing became so important.
Yeah.
Or random to the outside world became so
that's important. A great example. It doesn't have to be obvious to everybody else, but I worked as a corporate art advisor when I first moved back to Des Moines, and I did a lot of corporate art tours. And it's fascinating to me that you can blend the message of the company with education, so that people, your employees, most importantly, see the art collection as this added benefit and working in a beautiful space, but also reinforcing the message of the good work that they do every day. That was really great to, walk down the halls and hear a story that you had told them telling them to somebody else. I mean, that really felt like, okay, what I'm doing here is good because they're connecting with it.
Yeah, and it's so good. I know for us, it feels so great when, and I'm sure it's similar for you, just said it did, when you've invested time, effort, and resources to put these things out there, and somebody else takes that information, takes that product, and uses it in the way that you thought about, in places they thought about. It makes us feel good. It makes me feel good. I'm sure it makes you feel good that actually they listen and bring that forward.
Yeah,
Liz, has been an amazing conversation.
That's great.
Thanks. I want to thank Liz for being our guest again today. You've been watching Behind the Gavel with Jason. We do this every Friday morning. Next Friday, I'm going to have Colleen Lynch. And this is a topic I didn't know I'd ever have to talk about or want to talk. Well, I want to talk about it. Colleen is 30 years old. She was a librarian who started reading books and had too many books, started selling books, and is in the process of buying a brick and mortar building to open up a used bookstore. I'm super excited to talk to her about that. If you have questions for her or for us, you can always post them below. You can drop an email at info@kcauctioncompany.com or give us a phone call at 816-283-3633. I want to bring Liz back in real quick and tell people, Liz Lidgett Gallery, you can find her on Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook. And if you have questions for Liz specifically, you can always give her a call.
Please.
At the number or an email at hello@lizlidgett.com. Liz, you've been on the show before. You know what's coming up next. I always like to give my guests an opportunity to take a minute or two to just talk about anything about what we talked about today, or about your business, or about the art world, or anything you want to talk to about. So Liz, with that, the floor is yours for a couple of minutes.
Sure. So, one thing that I want to tell you a little bit about our gallery, since we've talked about representation of artists, and I know that Jason and I are going to do that again on another episode, but we represent at least 50% women artists. And that's something that I feel incredibly passionate about. We think a lot about the different types of diversity of artists that we have here, that we represent, but also the diversity in mediums. We represent artists from all over the world, here in the Midwest, all four corners of the United States, and then several other countries. So I hope that you will give us a look at lizlidgett.com. We're doing some really exciting things. We're trying to make artwork and art collecting as accessible as possible. We do believe that art is for everybody. So if we can help you fall in love with art or start your art collection, we would be honored to do so. How's that, Jason?
That was fantastic. I love how you led into a show that we're going to be doing. In fact, we're talking about, Liz and I are talking about doing a panel discussion on representation for female artists and artists of color and all those areas of the world that have looked like me for way too long, to bring them to other people. Because more art means better art for everybody in every genre. It makes, when I have competing against women auctioneers, my game has to be better because there's more competition. The same is true for artists. Your artwork has to be better if you're competing against more artists, which makes everybody's work more interesting. Yeah. Liz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. I am sorry you got rained on in your presentation this morning.
That's all right.
But Des Moines needed rain. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.